Harlem, New York. 2:47 p.m. Thursday, August 15, 1952. The temperature sits at 83 degrees. The air above 125th Street shimmers like water, thick with exhaust fumes and the smell of hot concrete. Outside the 28th Precinct station house, the afternoon heat has driven most people into whatever shade they can find. But on the front steps, beneath the harsh glare of the August sun, a confrontation is about to unfold that will echo from these streets all the way to President Harry Truman's desk. Police Chief Walter Merrick stands alone on the top step, a thick-set man in a wrinkled tan uniform that shows dark stains under the arms. 51 years old. Irish-American. Navy veteran. He's been running this precinct like his personal kingdom for 3 years, collecting tribute from every numbers runner, bootlegger, and businessman who wants to operate without harassment. His badge isn't just a symbol of authority, it's a license to humiliate. At 2:49 p.m., a city bus hisses to a stop at the curb. An elderly black woman steps down carefully, one hand steadying her Sunday hat, the other clutching a worn leather purse. Her name is Margaret Johnson. 67 years old. Born in South Carolina during Reconstruction. Mother to the most feared man in Harlem. She walks toward the station steps with the deliberate dignity of someone who has survived sheriffs, landlords, and decades of systematic disrespect. She's here on a simple mission, to ask why her grandson was beaten bloody in a patrol car last night, and why no one will tell her where they've taken him. Margaret stops 2 steps below Chief Merrick. The street grows quiet around her. "Sir," she says, her voice clear and respectful, "I need to speak with someone about my grandson. He was arrested last night, and I haven't heard." Merrick doesn't let her finish. His lips curl into something that isn't quite a smile. "You people," he says, loud enough for the gathering crowd to hear, "always want something. Your boy got what he earned. You don't like it, go cry to your jungle king." The slur that follows is old, venomous, and calculated to wound. Several witnesses turn away. Others don't. Margaret straightens her spine. "I came here respectful, sir. I expect the same." Merrick steps down 1 stair, closing the distance. His shadow falls across her face. "Lady," he says, his voice rising for the audience, "you don't get respect. You get reminders." His right hand moves fast. The slap cracks across 125th Street like a gunshot. Margaret's head snaps to the side, her hat tumbling to the concrete, her purse spilling its contents across the steps. The sound freezes every conversation on the block. Margaret staggers but doesn't fall. She lifts a trembling hand to her cheek, where a red welt is already forming. Her eyes water, but she's too proud to let the tears fall in front of him. Merrick leans close, his voice a venomous whisper. "Tell your criminal son this city belongs to me." He's finished. Across the street, half hidden in the shadows of Coleman's barber shop, a tall man in a dark summer suit watches through the window. No jewelry, no flash, just a folded newspaper in his hands and eyes that miss nothing. Ellsworth Bumpy Johnson sees it all. The slap, his mother's hat in the gutter, the smirk on Merrick's face, the way other officers pretend to see nothing. Bumpy doesn't move, doesn't curse, doesn't reach for the .38 in his shoulder holster. He simply folds his newspaper once, places it on the windowsill, and checks his watch. 2:52 p.m. Inside the barber shop, 3 barbers and 4 customers wait for him to explode, to storm across the street, to make Merrick pay immediately. That's what men do when they see their mother struck like a servant. But Bumpy Johnson isn't most men. He steps back from the window, his voice calm as winter. "Get my mother. Bring her inside. Now." As Margaret is helped off the street, As Chief Merrick laughs with his men, a decision is being carved into stone. There will be no shouting match on the sidewalk, no protest signs, no angry speeches. There will be a ledger. There will be a timeline. And there will be consequences so systematic, so complete, that they will redefine what power means in this neighborhood. In exactly 72 hours, Walter Merrick will lose his badge, his career, and his ability to walk safely through any street in New York City. The story of how one slap destroyed a man's entire world is a warning that history has tried to hide. If you enjoy these deep dives into the underworld, you can support the channel by buying me a coffee using the link in the description. Your support keeps these investigations alive. Now, let's go back to August 15th, 1952, and understand exactly how respect gets enforced when the law won't do it. Harlem, 1952. On paper, Ellsworth Raymond Bumpy Johnson is a criminal. In practice, he is the architecture of a parallel government that actually serves its citizens. When the official system fails, his system delivers. When banks refuse loans, politicians ignore votes, and police provide brutality instead of protection, Bumpy Johnson provides what democracy promised but never delivered. Every Monday morning at exactly 9 o'clock, his accountant, Junie Byard, delivers the weekly report. $47,000 flows through the organization every 7 days, nearly $500,000 in today's currency. The numbers racket is the engine. 300 runners, 50 writers, a dozen bankers operating from barbershops to beauty parlors. But the money is just machinery. The real power lies in reliability. When Mrs. Patterson's son nearly died from pneumonia, Bumpy paid the hospital bill without being asked. When the boiler broke at Reverend Powell's church in January, Bumpy's men had it fixed by sundown. When 17 teenagers on the corner faced the choice between crime and poverty, Bumpy gave them jobs as runners. This is governance through utility. Power earned one favor at a time. His protection services aren't theoretical. A grocer on Lenox Avenue who pays his percentage never has windows smashed by kids, never gets shaken down by rogue cops looking for extra income. A jazz club that respects the arrangement never finds itself raided on Friday night, when the money flows heaviest. The system works because it has to. The legitimate world doesn't serve these streets, so an illegitimate one fills the vacuum with ruthless efficiency. At the center of this empire stands one immovable moral anchor, Margaret Johnson. 67 years old, born during Reconstruction's brutal aftermath, she raised Bumpy alone after his father disappeared into South Carolina's chain gang system. She worked 30 years as a domestic servant, scrubbing floors in white homes while her son built an empire in Harlem's shadows. Every Sunday, he sits beside her at Abyssinian Baptist Church, singing hymns in a voice nobody else ever hears. She is the only person who can tell him no and be obeyed. She is the only authority he recognizes above his own judgment. The unwritten constitution of 1952 Harlem is simple and absolute. Police captains receive monthly envelopes thick with cash. Politicians accept campaign contributions delivered in neat bundles. Everyone maintains the fiction of legal order while participating in systematic corruption. But the agreement has boundaries that cannot be crossed. Respect flows both ways, always. A cop can take bribes, but he cannot brutalize the community without consequence. The balance is delicate, maintained through mutual understanding that violence remains an option, just not the first one. 3 years earlier, a white loan shark named Eddie Corrigan made a fatal miscalculation in Murphy's bar. He called Bumpy a slur in front of 20 witnesses, drunk enough to believe his Genovese family connections made him untouchable. Bumpy said nothing. He finished his drink, paid his tab, and left quietly. 72 hours later, Corrigan's pawnshop burned to its foundation. Electrical fire, according to official reports. His Buick was pulled from the Hudson River, doors open, seats slashed. Corrigan himself appeared at Penn Station with a suitcase and a one-way ticket to Chicago, his face bearing bruises that suggested someone had carefully explained the geography of respect. That was the Johnson method: systematic, disproportionate, and final. To Bumpy, disrespect isn't personal, it's structural. If one outsider can spit in his face without consequences, the entire ecosystem he maintains collapses. If a police chief can slap his mother in broad daylight, the illusion of protection shatters. Weakness invites wolves, and Bumpy Johnson does not tolerate wolves in his territory. Now in the cramped back room of Coleman's barbershop, that philosophy faces its ultimate test. His mother sits in the worn leather chair, a dish towel filled with ice pressed against her swelling cheek. The outline of a white man's hand is visible under the thin layer of melting frost. Bumpy stands over her, jacket off, tie loosened, eyes flat and calculating. "Let it go, baby." "I'm fine," Margaret says, voice steady despite the pain. She has survived sheriffs in South Carolina, landlords in Georgia, foremen in New York. One slap is not new, it is only the latest entry in a lifetime's ledger of humiliation. Bumpy leans down and kisses her forehead gently, his hand adjusting the ice with surprising delicacy. "You're right, Mama," he says, voice low and controlled. "You are fine." But he won't be. What Chief Walter Merrick didn't understand was that he hadn't just slapped an elderly woman. He'd declared war on an institution. And institutions don't forgive. They execute. 4 hours and 47 minutes after Walter Merrick's hand crossed Margaret Johnson's face, the real government of Harlem convenes an emergency session. The back room of Small's Paradise seals tight against the world. Cigar smoke hangs thick in the air, mixing with the scent of aged bourbon and decades of decisions that shaped the neighborhood's survival. Nat Pettigrew occupies the chair to Bumpy's right. 6'3", 230 pounds of controlled violence. Former heavyweight boxer who discovered that breaking bones for money pays better than breaking them for trophies. He speaks only when spoken to, but his presence makes the room smaller, the air heavier. He is the enforcement arm, the man who translates decisions into consequences. Junie Bard sits opposite, wire-rimmed glasses reflecting the lamplight, ledger books stacked with military precision. Former ears investigator who learned that hunting criminals pays less than serving them. He understands money as a weapon more devastating than bullets. He can destroy a man's entire existence using nothing but mathematics and patience. At the head of the scarred mahogany table sits Madame Stephanie St. Clair, the legendary Queen of Numbers. 58 years old, impeccably dressed, French Creole accent still thick after 3 decades in New York. She built Harlem's numbers empire before Dutch Schultz tried to steal it through violence. She survived that war through cunning and connections that snake through City Hall, police headquarters, and judgeships across Manhattan. Politicians owe her favors measured in decades. Bumpy lays out the target with surgical precision. Chief Walter Merrick. 51 years old, Brooklyn-born, second-generation cop whose father taught him that authority plus brutality equals respect. He rose through the ranks by being exceptionally violent in black neighborhoods where complaints vanish into bureaucratic machinery designed to protect its own. 17 excessive force complaints filed over 12 years. 0 reprimands. 0 suspensions. 0 consequences. Merrick believes himself untouchable because the evidence supports that belief. The mayor's office considers him an asset, a man willing to do the dirty work that keeps certain populations terrified and compliant. Newspaper reporters quote him regularly, painting him as tough but fair, a blue-collar hero. He's being considered for deputy commissioner, a promotion that would grant him authority over every precinct in Manhattan. His badge isn't identification, it's immunity. This belief will destroy him. The strategy unfolds in 3 phases, each designed to strip away one layer of protection. Phase 1. Financial strangulation. Cut off his graft income from protection rackets. Every business paying Merrick for the privilege of operating without harassment will suddenly stop paying. Phase 2. Political isolation. Stephanie will activate her network, making Merrick radioactive in City Hall. Phase 3. Personal consequences. When the badge is gone, when political protection evaporates, he will receive a physical reminder that some debts must be paid in pain. At 10:47 p.m., the machinery activates. 12 men working in shifts. 2 private investigators. 1 photographer with telephoto lens. 1 lawyer specializing in finding vulnerabilities in clean careers. Total operation cost, $8,000. Bumpy authorizes the expense without hesitation. The intelligence flows immediately. Merrick's home address in Queens. Daily routes. Favorite bar. Flanagan's in Brooklyn. His mistress, Dorothy Keene, 26-year-old showgirl. Apartment paid with money skimmed from evidence room seizures. His gambling debts. His systematic theft from drug busts. At 2:47 a.m., 12 hours after the slap, Walter Merrick stumbles from Flanagan's bar, 3 whiskeys deep, laughing with fellow officers about teaching that old crow her place. He doesn't notice the black Cadillac idling half a block away. He doesn't see the photographer in the passenger seat. He has no idea that 4 different people are now documenting his every move, building a file that will erase him completely. The hunter has become the prey. He just doesn't know it yet. 18 hours after the slap, Walter Merrick's financial empire evaporates in a single morning. At 8:47 a.m. Friday, his 3 bagmen, officers Dunn, Kowalski, and Martinez, begin their weekly collection rounds through the 28th Precinct territory. 23 establishments await them. Laundromats laundering more than clothes, bodega backrooms hosting dice games, speakeasies disguised as social clubs, legitimate businesses paying for the privilege of operating without harassment. Every proprietor delivers identical words, as if reading from the same script, new management directives. We're not paying anymore. The bagmen return empty-handed, faces pale with understanding that something fundamental has shifted overnight. Merrick stares at the cash box that should contain $2,400, money that isn't personal income, but operational overhead. He pays his own superiors $800 monthly to maintain their willful blindness. He covers his mortgage, his car payments, Dorothy's apartment rent. Without this weekly flow, he's not just broke, he's exposed, vulnerable to the kind of investigation that destroys careers and ends in prison cells. At 2:47 p.m., exactly 24 hours after his hand crossed Margaret Johnson's face, the packages begin arriving. Package 1 materializes on the mayor's desk, 4 years of meticulously documented financial records showing $31,000 stolen from evidence room seizures, bank deposits that don't match salary, property logs that never reached the clerk's office, undeniable proof of systematic grand larceny. Package 2 arrives at the New York Amsterdam News, crystal clear photographs of the slapping incident, taken by a janitor with a concealed camera, witness statements from 3 officers who suddenly remember seeing everything. The editor doesn't hesitate. This is front-page material that sells papers and changes elections. At 8:47 p.m., Package 3 destroys what remains of Merrick's personal life. His wife Helen opens their front door to find a courier holding a manila envelope. Inside, photographs of Dorothy Keene, 26-year-old showgirl. Photographs of Merrick entering her apartment building on nights he claimed to be working late. Photographs of them together, intimate moments captured with telephoto precision. The note is brief and devastating. Your husband is a thief and a liar. Soon, everyone will know. Merrick's world fractures in real time. He calls Dorothy from a payphone. Voice shaking. Orders her to pack and leave New York immediately. She refuses because she doesn't understand what's happening, thinks he's overreacting to jealousy. Helen confronts him in their kitchen, screaming about the photographs, convinced he hired someone to follow her, unable to comprehend that someone is systematically dismantling their entire existence. The psychological pressure mounts with calculated cruelty. Merrick starts seeing threats everywhere. Black Cadillacs that might be following him. Men in dark suits watching from street corners. He draws his service weapon on a mailman who approaches too quickly, nearly shoots an innocent federal employee in broad daylight. Neighbors notice. Fellow officers notice. The unraveling becomes public. At 2:47 a.m. Saturday morning, 36 hours after the slap, Walter Merrick wakes in his suburban Queens bedroom. Something feels wrong. The window stands open. He knows he locked it. Nothing is stolen. Nothing is disturbed. But sitting on his bedside table, illuminated by streetlight, is a photograph of his own mother, taken from the family album downstairs. Next to it, a single white rose, the funeral flower. A note in careful handwriting reads, "Respect is expensive. You are in debt. Someone was in his house. Someone stood over him while he slept. Someone could have killed him but chose not to. Chose instead to deliver a message more terrifying than violence." At 8:47 a.m. Saturday morning, 42 hours after the slap, Walter Merrick's career dies in black ink across newsstands throughout Harlem. The New York-Amsterdam News hits the streets with the force of a judicial verdict. The headline devours the front page in aggressive type. Police chief assaults elderly churchgoer. Beneath it, the janitor's photographs tell an undeniable story. Merrick's hand mid-swing. Margaret Johnson's hat tumbling toward concrete, the sheer arrogance frozen on his face for eternity. 3 officers who witnessed everything suddenly recover their memories with remarkable clarity. Their sworn statements run in boxed sidebars, each word a nail in Merrick's coffin. She approached respectfully. He struck her without provocation. Racial slur, clearly audible. The paper prints Margaret's age, her decades of church membership, her lifetime as a domestic worker. The narrative is simple and devastating. An elderly church-going grandmother, assaulted by the man sworn to protect her community. By noon, Harlem transforms into a powder keg without a release valve. 2,000 protesters surround the 28th precinct, their homemade signs bearing words no politician wants linked to their city. Brutality. Terror. Justice. Now. Ministers abandon prepared sermons to deliver prosecutorial indictments from their pulpits, comparing Merrick's assault to biblical injustice. Their congregations spill into the streets afterward, righteous anger flowing like water through the neighborhood's arteries. The NAACP announces federal civil rights charges, mobilizing their entire legal machinery. Thurgood Marshall issues a carefully worded statement from the organization's national headquarters, calling the incident symptomatic of systematic police brutality that demands immediate federal intervention. At 2:47 p.m., Exactly 48 hours after Merrick's hand crossed Margaret Johnson's face, the scope explodes beyond Harlem's boundaries. Bumpy activates the second phase through Stephanie St. Clair's political network, a web of connections that extends far beyond New York's borders. Editors in Chicago, Detroit, Philadelphia, and Baltimore receive identical packages, photographs, witness statements, and a clean narrative packaged for maximum national outrage. The story spreads through black press wire services like wildfire: the Chicago Defender, Pittsburgh Courier, Baltimore Afro-American. By evening, radio hosts from Washington to New Orleans discuss the Harlem slap as symbolic of something much larger than one man's brutality. Intelligence reports flood into Washington offices with alarming consistency. The message is simple and terrifying for Democratic operatives. Harlem stands on the verge of uncontrolled civil unrest if Merrick remains in uniform. The timing is catastrophic for the establishment. 1952 is an election year. The Democratic Party relies heavily on northern black votes to offset inevitable hostility in the South. Urban instability, especially in a city as visible as New York, represents strategic suicide. President Harry Truman receives his evening briefing at 7:15 p.m. The Harlem situation occupies 3 full pages of urgent intelligence. His advisors frame the crisis in terms he understands immediately. One rogue police officer is endangering Democratic electoral prospects in New York, Pennsylvania, Illinois, and Michigan, states that cannot be lost. Truman's reaction, according to witnesses present, is characteristically blunt and decisive. He demands the situation be liquidated immediately to prevent a public relations disaster that could cost Democrats the White House. The directive travels down through layers of federal bureaucracy, reaching New York City within the hour. At 8:47 p.m., 54 hours after the slap, the mayor's office receives a call that ends careers. His secretary's voice trembles as she announces, "White House, on line 1." The conversation lasts exactly 4 minutes. When the mayor replaces the receiver, Walter Merrick's transformation from asset to liability is complete. The shield that protected him for 2 decades evaporates faster than morning frost. The machinery of the state turns against its own with ruthless efficiency. Internal Affairs opens a formal investigation with unprecedented speed. Federal agents receive detailed briefings on the embezzlement evidence. By midnight, suspension paperwork is typed, signed, and delivered by courier to Merrick's Queens home. No badge, no gun, no authority. The man who believed his uniform granted immunity discovers that political protection can disappear faster than respect. At 2:47 a.m., Sunday morning, 60 hours after he struck Margaret Johnson, Walter Merrick sits alone in a corner booth at Flanagan's Bar in Brooklyn. The place is nearly empty, the silence heavy with the weight of destroyed careers. His third whiskey remains untouched, ice melting slowly in the amber liquid. He knows exactly who orchestrated this systematic destruction. Everyone in the city knows. But knowing the truth and proving it exists in different universes, and Bumpy Johnson operates in the space between them. The bartender approaches with downcast eyes, sliding a glass across the scarred wood, a drink Merrick didn't order. When he lifts it, a single playing card lies underneath, the ace of spades, death's signature in every game ever played. Written across its white margin in careful black ink is a time, 2:47 p.m., 12 hours left. For what? Merrick doesn't know. But the message cuts through his whiskey-fogged brain with crystalline clarity. The clock is running, the debt remains unpaid, and someone is coming to collect what respect demands. At 8:47 a.m. Sunday morning, 66 hours after the slap, Walter Merrick's phone rings in his empty Queens house. His wife left yesterday, taking their daughter to her sister's place in New Jersey, the sound of slamming doors still echoing through rooms that smell of abandonment and fear. The number on the rotary dial shows nothing, just blank space where identification should be. He answers because he has nothing left to lose. The voice is calm, professional, devoid of threat but heavy with absolute command. 409 Edgecombe Avenue, Apartment 3C. 2:47 p.m. Come. Alone. Bring flowers. The line goes dead before Merrick can respond, leaving him staring at the receiver like a man holding his own death certificate. He sits at his kitchen table, understanding that this is the final summons. He could run, catch a train to Boston, disappear into some Midwest city where nobody knows his face or his crimes. But the mathematics of survival don't work. He's broke, his accounts frozen pending federal investigation. He's alone, his fellow officers avoiding his calls like he carries plague. He's already destroyed, his career erased, his reputation shattered across every newspaper in the Northeast. The question becomes brutally simple. What more could they possibly do? The answer settles cold in his stomach. They could finish what they started. At 2:47 p.m., exactly 72 hours after his hand crossed Margaret Johnson's face, Walter Merrick walks through Harlem toward his judgment. The August heat presses down like a weight, but he feels cold inside. Hollow. He stops at a bodega on 145th Street, hands trembling as he counts out change for white roses. The clerk recognizes him from the newspaper photographs but says nothing, watching this broken man with the detached curiosity reserved for traffic accidents and public humiliation. He climbs 3 flights of stairs in the narrow building, his breath coming hard, his shirt soaked through with nervous sweat despite the mild temperature. Each step feels like descending into something final and irreversible. He knocks on the door marked 3C, the sound echoing in the hallway like a gavel falling. Bumpy Johnson opens the door wearing an immaculate charcoal suit, white shirt pressed to military precision, tie knotted with geometric perfection. His face shows no anger, no satisfaction, no emotion whatsoever. He is calm as winter, inevitable as gravity, terrifying in his complete control. He steps aside without speaking, allowing Merrick to enter his domain. Margaret Johnson sits in the living room's best chair, hands folded in her lap, wearing a Sunday dress and the same hat she wore 3 days ago. The bruise on her face has faded to yellow-green, a map of violence slowly disappearing, but the outline of fingers remains visible under the thin layer of makeup she's applied. She looks at Merrick with eyes that hold no fear, only a profound ancient patience that has survived decades of systematic disrespect. Bumpy closes the door behind them. The sound is final, absolute. When he speaks, his voice carries the weight of absolute authority, filling the room without rising above conversational level. "You thought that badge made you untouchable," he says, each word measured and precise. "You forgot that respect isn't given by institutions. It's earned through actions. You disrespected my mother. You disrespected this community. So I removed your institution. Now you understand what power really means." Merrick tries to speak, but Bumpy raises one hand, silencing him effortlessly, demonstrating that even here, even now, he controls every variable. "I'm offering you 2 options. Option 1. You get on your knees right now, in front of witnesses, and you apologize to my mother for what you did. You do this with humility, acknowledging your crime. Then you leave New York tonight and never return. Option 2. You skip the apology, but you still leave tonight. The difference is you don't get to choose how you go or what you look like when you arrive. The silence stretches, thick and suffocating. Merrick looks at Margaret Johnson, at the woman he struck without thought, without consequence, believing his badge granted him the right to brutalize anyone he chose. He sees in her eyes something he didn't recognize 3 days ago. Dignity that no slap could erase. Strength that no uniform could diminish. Moral authority that made his badge look like a child's toy. Slowly, painfully, Walter Merrick drops to his knees on the hardwood floor. The movement is clumsy, the surrender absolute. The white roses fall from his trembling hands, scattering across the worn carpet like funeral offerings. Tears track through the stubble on his cheeks as the words come through shame, through the complete destruction of everything he believed about power and authority. "I'm sorry," he whispers, voice cracking like ice under pressure. "I was wrong. I'm so sorry, Mrs. Johnson. I disrespected you. I disrespected this neighborhood. I'm sorry." Margaret Johnson looks at him for a long moment, studying the man who thought her life weighed less than his authority. She gives a small nod, not forgiveness, but acknowledgement. She says nothing because she doesn't need to. Her silence is acceptance without absolution, recognition without reconciliation. She has heard him, and that is enough. At 8:47 p.m., 78 hours after the slap, Walter Merrick boards a Greyhound bus heading west, carrying one suitcase and the weight of systematic humiliation. 3 weeks later, he's spotted in Philadelphia, working as a night watchman at a textile warehouse, earning $62 weekly, guarding crates of rusted machinery. He never wears a badge again, never speaks of his years in uniform, becomes a ghost haunting the margins of a life he once controlled. On August 25th, the full story reaches President Truman's desk in a classified briefing that runs 17 pages. The FBI file on Ellsworth Bumpy Johnson expands by 47 pages of investigation, surveillance notes, witness interviews, and political analysis. But no charges are filed. No arrests are made. Because technically, legally, Bumpy Johnson hadn't done anything criminal. He hadn't fired a shot. He hadn't thrown a punch. He hadn't even raised his voice. He had simply revealed the truth about a corrupt police chief, exposed the rot beneath the badge, demonstrated that real power doesn't come from institutions, but from the systematic willingness to destroy anyone who challenges respect. And the truth had destroyed Walter Merrick more completely than any bullet ever could. The story of what happened in August 1952 stops being an event and becomes a parable before the month ends. In barbershops and pool halls, on street corners and church steps, parents tell children about the police chief who thought his badge made him untouchable, about the grandmother who got slapped, about the son who dismantled a man's entire existence without firing a single shot. Old men tell young men in hushed voices, the details shifting and growing with each retelling. Some versions add violence that never happened. Others subtract the systematic precision that actually occurred. But the core remains unchanged, carved into Harlem's collective memory like scripture. Respect is non-negotiable, and consequences are inevitable. The ripple effects extend far beyond one destroyed career. The NAACP seizes the Merrick case as irrefutable evidence of systemic police brutality, folding his 17 dismissed complaints into a growing stack of documentation that officials can no longer ignore. Here is a police chief, protected by rank and politics, exposed not by internal oversight, but by a man the government labels a criminal. Reform movements gain momentum they lacked before. Suddenly there are congressional hearings, federal investigations, civilian oversight committees. The mayor implements new review procedures for police complaints, not because he suddenly develops moral clarity, but because the political cost of inaction has been demonstrated in real time. Protests, national headlines, a phone call from the White House triggered by electoral mathematics rather than moral outrage. None of this happens without Bumpy Johnson's intervention. The government calls it justice reform. Harlem knows better. It's fear disguised as progress, systematic change born from one man's willingness to enforce consequences that exist outside courtrooms and legal procedures. The economic analysis is brutally simple and devastatingly effective. Bumpy spent $8,000 and 72 hours to destroy a man who believed himself untouchable. Return on investment, absolute authority in Harlem for the next decade. No police chief ever again touches a civilian without calculating whether the badge will protect them from consequences that operate beyond official channels. The lesson spreads through precincts like a virus. Harlem operates under different rules now. Rules enforced by someone who understands power better than the people who claim to monopolize it. Word travels through back rooms and patrol cars, through precinct houses and city hall offices. A police chief put his hands on Bumpy Johnson's mother and lost everything: badge, career, reputation, family, future. The calculus becomes simple for anyone considering a similar act of disrespect. Whatever temporary satisfaction they might feel won't survive the systematic destruction that follows. For the price of a mid-range Cadillac, Bumpy Johnson purchased something money typically cannot buy: unchallenged moral authority backed by the demonstrated willingness to use it. Years later, in 1961, a local minister interviews Bumpy for a community history project that will never see publication. The recording survives, his voice calm and matter-of-fact as he explains the philosophy that governed his response to Merrick's assault. "I'm not a good man," he says, each word measured and precise. "I'm not a hero. But I understand power. Real power isn't violence, it's consequences. It's making people understand that actions have weight, that disrespect has a price. Sometimes that price is paid in blood. Sometimes it's paid in everything else. The important thing is that the price gets paid. Always, without exception. That's how you build something that lasts." This philosophy operates outside traditional moral frameworks, but within a brutal logic that the neighborhood understands completely. When institutions fail to deliver justice, when the system protects its own regardless of criminality, someone else must enforce the rules that make civilized society possible. Bumpy doesn't claim righteousness. He claims effectiveness. The timing makes the story even more remarkable. This is 1952, 2 years before Brown v. Board of Education reaches the Supreme Court, 3 years before Rosa Parks refuses to give up her seat in Montgomery. The civil rights movement as America remembers it hasn't begun yet, existing only in strategy sessions and legal briefs. But in Harlem, justice is already being enforced with surgical precision by a man the government officially categorizes as a criminal, a man who understands that waiting for institutions to grant respect means waiting forever. Official America is still debating whether black citizens deserve equal protection under the law. Unofficial Harlem operates under a different constitution. If the state fails to deliver justice, someone else will. The lesson reverberates through a community that has learned not to expect protection from the people sworn to provide it, but to create their own systems of accountability when the official ones prove worthless. Margaret Johnson lives another 16 years beyond the slap that almost defined her, passing quietly in her sleep on July 7, 1968. The same year her son dies of heart failure in a Harlem restaurant. Her funeral at Abyssinian Baptist Church draws over 2,000 mourners. Police chiefs send elaborate flower arrangements, their names printed on ribbons like offerings to a power they once pretended didn't exist. Politicians who privately condemned her son as a gangster stand in front pews delivering polished eulogies about dignity, resilience, and community service. They are not there for who she was, though she earned respect on her own terms through decades of quiet strength. They are there because of what her son proved when someone dared to touch her, that in a world where institutions protect themselves first, a single man with the will to enforce consequences can reshape reality. Walter Merrick dies in 1981 in a Philadelphia nursing home, alone, forgotten, his obituary running 3 sentences in a newspaper nobody reads. His decades in uniform, his Navy service, his rise through the ranks, all of it erased by 72 hours in August 1952, when he learned that some debts cannot be discharged through time or distance. The bruise on Margaret Johnson's face healed in 2 weeks. The lesson it taught lasted generations. The equation is merciless in its clarity. Power without respect is temporary. Badges get taken away. Elections get lost. Authority evaporates when political winds shift. Respect without power is meaningless. Good intentions without the ability to enforce consequences become empty words that change nothing. But respect backed by the systematic willingness to destroy anyone who challenges it? That endures. That becomes legend. That transforms from individual action into institutional memory. That is what Harlem learned in August 1952. That is what official America tried desperately to erase from its textbooks. And that is why this story matters, because it reveals a truth the law refused to admit, a truth enforced not by statutes and seals, but by a man who understood that in a corrupt system, consequences are the only real justice. Sometimes justice doesn't come from courtrooms or legislation. Sometimes it comes from someone who understands that respect isn't requested. It's enforced, systematically, without mercy, until everyone understands that certain lines cannot be crossed without paying a price that destroys everything you are.